The black nanny defied the millionaire's fiancé. What followed next was unthinkable. Sometimes the most dangerous wars don't happen in boardrooms or battlefields. They happen inside a home behind polished doors, beneath glittering chandeliers where pride, ego, and loyalty collide. This story begins with a woman named Grace. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful in the way people usually measured. But she had something far stronger, the unwavering trust of two children who clung to her like their anchor in a storm. Grace had raised them, soothed them, loved them. To them, she wasn't the nanny. She was family. And then came her. The millionaire's fiancée, beautiful, dazzling, the kind of woman who knew how to turn heads when she walked into a room. At first glance, she was perfect, a picture of charm. But behind that charm hid steel claws. She wasn't just entering a relationship. She wanted control over the man, the house, and the children. Grace noticed it right away. The fiancé never bent down to listen when the kids spoke. She didn't care about their drawings, their inside jokes, their little victories. What she cared about was image, appearances, power, and grace. Grace represented something she couldn't buy: authentic love and loyalty. It started small: side comments, dismissive looks, a hand that tightened a little too firmly on the millionaire's arm whenever Grace entered the room. But the children's devotion to Grace only made things worse. Every time they reached for her hand, every time they whispered "Mama Grace" in their sleep, the fiancé's smile got tighter. And Grace, she wasn't the type to shrink away. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply stood her ground, steady and unshakable. A quiet force of nature. The more the fiancé tried to chip away at her, the more the children clung to her. That loyalty wasn't something that could be faked or controlled. And here's where the storm began to gather. Because in households like this, love and loyalty don't always bow to money. And money doesn't forgive defiance. What followed next would leave scars on everyone involved. It wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a battle of values. A woman with everything to lose against a woman who had already given everything. And when those two worlds collided, the fallout was unthinkable. So let me ask you this: what happens when the one person who refuses to bow down is the very one holding the family together? Hey, if you love stories where justice isn't just served, it's chilled and plated with silver, please hit subscribe. These videos take hours of writing, editing, and emotional recovery from secondhand rage, so your support seriously means the world. Grace wasn't just an employee. She was the rhythm of that household, the steady heartbeat beneath the chaos of wealth and schedules. The children adored her. You could see it in the way they ran to her after school, arms wide, voices tumbling over each other to tell her their little victories and heartbreaks. Bedtime, that was sacred. Grace never simply read stories. She performed them: voices, gestures, the whole stage. The kids would collapse into laughter at her pirate growl or clutch her sleeve when her witch's cackle filled the room. By the end, they were tucked in safe, wrapped not just in blankets, but in the warmth of someone who truly saw them. The millionaire, their father, knew this, though he rarely said it out loud. His world was late-night calls, endless meetings, and deals measured in millions. He loved his children, of course, but the truth, Grace was the one who knew their favorite cereals. The one who remembered which stuffed animal had to be by their side when they slept. She was their constant, the glue holding everything together when money and ambition pulled their father away. Now, you'd think that kind of devotion would be celebrated. But that wasn't the fiancé's style. From the moment she stepped into the house, Grace felt the chill. It wasn't about anything Grace did wrong, it was about what she represented. Imagine being a woman stepping into a ready-made family, only to realize the children's affection wasn't for you. It was for the nanny. That truth burned under the fiancé's flawless smile. She smiled, yes, but her eyes lingered too long when Grace comforted the kids. Her laugh was a little too sharp when she tried to imitate Grace's silly bedtime voices. To outsiders, she was charming, but behind closed doors, the comparison was impossible to ignore. One evening stands out. The fiancé decided to host a dinner all glamour and sophistication. The kids shuffled in, dressed uncomfortably in starched clothes, clearly out of place. Grace crouched down, whispering encouragement, smoothing their colors. They relaxed instantly, trusting her. The fiancé noticed. Her perfectly lined lips tightened as she leaned toward the millionaire and muttered, "Just loud enough, she coddles them too much. They'll never grow up strong that way." Grace heard it, but she didn't react. She simply smiled at the children, steady as always. That was her strength. She never snapped back, never lowered herself to petty fights. She just was asterisk. And that drove the fiancé mad, because here's the thing, children are sharp. They can feel the difference between real love and performance. And when the fiancé tried when she bent down with a rehearsed smile or bought them flashy gifts, the kids were polite but distant. They always drifted back to Grace, like compass needles pointing north. It wasn't about toys or grand gestures. It was about trust. Grace had earned theirs, not by demanding it, but by showing up every day. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every whispered secret in the dark. I think that's what made this story so powerful. Grace didn't have wealth or beauty polish for cameras. What she had was consistency. And in a house that glittered on the outside but often felt hollow on the inside, that consistency was priceless. And that's where the tension really began to brew, because loyalty, when it doesn't follow the script someone else wrote, can become a threat. The children leaned on Grace like she was the only solid ground they had. And the fiancé, she saw it as competition, not a partnership, not even something to learn from, but competition. It was a quiet war at first, a clipped tone here, a raised eyebrow there. Moments small enough that the millionaire, buried in contracts and conference calls, barely noticed. But Grace noticed, and so did the kids. One night, after the fiancé had scolded them for spilling juice at the table, the youngest crawled into Grace's lap and whispered, "She doesn't like us." Grace held him close, heartbreaking at the words, but she didn't argue. Instead, she kissed his forehead and said, "I like you enough for both of us." That's who she was, the heart of the home. A woman who gave without expecting, who defended without shouting. But the fiancé didn't see a heart. She saw an obstacle. And in her world, obstacles weren't endured. They were removed. Have you ever had someone in your life who felt more like family than your actual relatives? Share below. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was gradual. Like shadows creeping across a room at dusk. The fiancé didn't storm in with demands. She slid them into conversations, sugar-coated and sly. At first, it was little things. Maybe the children shouldn't spend so much time with Grace. She told the millionaire one evening, swirling wine in her glass. They'll never learn independence if they're coddled like this. He'd barely looked up from his phone. They're fine, he muttered, distracted, but the fiancé smiled, satisfied. Because she wasn't after agreement in that moment, she was planting seeds of doubt. The digs came sharper over time. At the breakfast table, she'd glance at the children's messy hair and say, "Grace, you forgot to brush properly again." When the kids ran to her after school, she'd chirp, "Sweethearts, shouldn't you say hello to me first?" Always delivered with a smile, as though she were only teasing. Grace heard it all. She stayed steady, unflinching, like a tree weathering a storm. But the quiet defiance, her refusal to flinch, to bow, only fueled the fiancé's resentment. I think that's what unsettled her most. Grace didn't fight back. She didn't scream or gossip or throw tantrums. She simply kept being herself. And sometimes silence is louder than shouting. The children weren't blind to it either. They felt the shift, sensed the tension like static in the air. The eldest once asked, "Why does she always sound mad when She talks to you, Grace brushed it off. But the question lingered. Kids know more than adults give them credit for. The millionaire found himself stuck in the middle. His fiancée demanded loyalty, hers. But his children clung to Grace like she was oxygen. He couldn't ignore it, not when bedtime ended in tears. If Grace wasn't the one tucking them in. Not when his youngest refused to eat unless she was at the table. One evening, it all came to a head. The fiancé decided the children should eat in the formal dining room to learn proper manners. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, plates set with polished silver. But the kids sat stiff, nervous, their feet dangling off oversized chairs. Grace tried to lighten the mood, telling them silly riddles while they picked at their food. The fiancé's smile cracked. "Grace," she said sharply, "this isn't story time. They need discipline, not constant entertainment." The millionaire shifted uncomfortably. Grace didn't argue, she never did. She simply placed a hand on the youngest's back, soothing, "Steady," and that small gesture spoke louder than any rebuttal could. That was the moment the fiancé snapped. Later that night, she cornered the millionaire. "It's me or her," she hissed. "You need to choose where your loyalty lies. Are you building a future with me or clinging to the nanny like she's your wife?" It was brutal, manipulative, but it worked at least partially. The millionaire hesitated. He didn't want to lose his fiancée, but he also knew the children's bond with Grace couldn't simply be severed. His compromise, he tried to juggle both sides, and in doing so pleased no one. For Grace, it was clear what was happening. She was being edged out, little by little, invitations to family outings forgotten. Her seat at the dinner table moved further away. Decisions about the kids made without her, each move small, deliberate, designed to remind her. Asterisk, you don't belong here. Asterisk, but Grace belonged more than anyone. And that truth gnawed at the fiancé's pride like acid. Here's the irony: the more the fiancé pushed, the more the kids resisted. They grew colder toward her, more protective of Grace. At bedtime, they clung to her tighter. At school drop-offs, they refused to let go of her hand. Loyalty can't be bought with designer clothes or expensive toys. It's earned, and Grace had earned it every day of their lives. The house itself began to feel divided. One side was polished smiles, Instagram-worthy dinners, appearances for the outside world. The other was warmth, laughter, the messy, real love Grace created with the children. Image versus reality. And the cracks between those worlds were starting to show. Looking back, it's almost funny. The fiancée believed she could control everything with charm and money. But you can't manipulate love, not real love. You can only expose your own emptiness by trying. The tension built like pressure in a sealed jar. And everyone in that house could feel it, especially Grace. She knew it was only a matter of time before the fiancé made her move. And when she did, well, that's when this story turned from uncomfortable to unforgettable. If you saw someone mistreating the person who raised you, would you step in or stay quiet? It happened on a Sunday afternoon, during what was supposed to be a simple family lunch. Nothing grand, just the millionaire, the children, Grace, and of course, the fiancé. The sun spilled through the tall windows, silver cutlery gleamed, and for a moment, the house looked like a magazine spread. But beneath the shine, tension simmered. The kids sat close to Grace, as they always did. The youngest leaned against her shoulder, whispering a silly joke that made her chuckle. The fiancé noticed, and her smile hardened into something brittle. Halfway through the meal, she made her move. "Grace," he said, her voice light but sharp enough to cut glass, "you really don't know when to step back, do you? They're too attached to you. It's unhealthy." The table went quiet. The children froze, forks suspended midair. Grace didn't flinch. She placed her hand gently on the child beside her and met the fiancé's eyes. "Calm, steady, with respect," she said softly. "Children need stability. That's not unhealthy. That's love." The fiancé's face tightened. She laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor, it was the kind you use when you're 2 seconds away from snapping. "Love," she scoffed. "You're the nanny, Grace. Don't forget that. They need discipline, structure, not some stand-in mother who plays make-believe at bedtime." It was cruel, meant to humiliate. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Grace, however, stayed rooted, her voice firm but never raised. "If being their nanny means I care for them as if they're my own, then yes, I'll stand in. I'll protect them. I'll do whatever they need, because that's what family does." Children's eyes lit up with relief, as if someone had spoken the words they were too afraid to say. But the fiancé's mask shattered. "You don't get to define family," she snapped. "That's my place. I will be their mother, not you." The words hit like a slap. The air grew heavy. The millionaire opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked trapped, caught between the woman he'd promised to marry and the woman who had practically raised his children. Grace didn't argue further. She simply turned to the kids, brushing their hair back from their foreheads, her actions louder than any speech. That silence, that quiet dignity, was worse than a shouting match, because it exposed the fiancé's cruelty without Grace ever needing to spell it out. But humiliation is a dangerous thing, and when someone obsessed with control feels they're losing it, that's when the claws come out. The fiancée slammed her fork down, the sound cracking like thunder in the hushed room. "This ends now," she hissed. "I won't be disrespected in my own home." Grace's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Then perhaps respect should be earned, not demanded." And just like that, the line was drawn. No shouting, no chaos. Just a quiet defiance that carried more weight than 100 angry words. The children reached for Grace's hands under the table, gripping tight, as though to say, "Don't let go, we're with you." And the fiancée saw it. She saw their loyalty, their trust, and the way it would never bend toward her no matter how hard she tried. In that moment, something dark flashed across her face, a decision forming, silent but sharp. That's when the fiancée made up her mind. Grace had to go. And the way she planned to remove her. That was what changed everything. What would you have done if you were Grace? Keep your head down or stand your ground? The breaking point had passed. The fiancée wasn't just irritated with Grace anymore, she was threatened by her. And when insecure people feel threatened, they don't back off, they go nuclear. It started the very next morning. Grace arrived at the house, as she had for years, only to find the front gate locked. Usually, security buzzed her in without question. But this time, the guard shifted nervously. "Miss Grace," he muttered, "I'm sorry. Ms. Kendall said you're no longer allowed on the property." The words hit like ice water. For the first time in years, Grace wasn't being welcomed home, she was being shut out. Grace didn't shout. She didn't beg. She just nodded, her jaw tight, and turned back toward her car. But inside, that silence was strategy, because what the fiancé hadn't realized was that this wasn't just about one woman's ego. This was about children, loyalty, and years of trust you can't simply erase with a locked gate. By lunchtime, the smear campaign had begun. The fiancé started whispering in the millionaire's ear, painting Grace as manipulative, overstepping, unprofessional. At a charity brunch, she leaned into her circle of polished friends and announced with fake concern, "It's just sad, really. The nanny's become obsessive. Almost like she thinks she owns those kids." And the worst part, people believe her, or at least, they pretended to. Money and image carry weight in those circles. But Grace, she wasn't naive. She knew she couldn't outspend or outshine this woman. What she could do was outthink her. So, she began her countermove, not with confrontation, but with connection. Quietly, carefully, she reached out to the people who really mattered. The family's relatives, the teachers at school, the parents who'd seen her at every pickup line and recital. People who knew the truth of who she was. She didn't complain. She didn't rat. She simply showed up where it mattered most, present, reliable. Undeniable. When one of the kids had a soccer game, Grace was there in the stands, cheering louder than anyone. When another had a piano recital, Grace sat in the audience, offering flowers afterward with that same steady smile. Meanwhile, the fiancée was too busy trying to look perfect to notice the ground shifting under her feet. She hosted parties, curated Instagram posts, posed as the future dream mother, but at home, the kids recoiled. They cried for Grace at bedtime. They refused to eat meals without asking, where's Miss Grace, and the millionaire, he noticed. He wasn't blind, just conflicted. But seeds of doubt had already been planted, and Grace was careful not to water them herself. She didn't push, she didn't demand. She let the truth speak through the children. Still, the fiancée wasn't finished. She escalated again. She filed paperwork to have Grace formally terminated from employment, stripping her access to the house, her paycheck, even her medical coverage. It was ruthless, calculated. What she didn't expect was Grace's quiet foresight. Years ago, when the children's mother passed away, the millionaire had drawn up documents giving Grace certain legal rights as a guardian in case of emergencies. They weren't flashy, but they were ironclad, and now they mattered more than ever. So when the fiancée tried to cut Grace out, she hit a wall of legal reality. Grace wasn't just a help. On paper and in practice, she was the safeguard of those children's well-being. And if the fiancé wanted to challenge that, she'd have to go to court. Court meant publicity. Publicity meant scrutiny. And scrutiny, that was the last thing the fiancé wanted. The millionaire, caught in the middle, finally began to see the pattern. Grace wasn't the problem. The problem was the woman trying so hard to erase her. And that's when Grace made her boldest move. Yet not an attack, but a reminder. One evening, she requested a quiet meeting with the millionaire. No kids, no fiancé, just the two of them in his study. She didn't rant about the smears or the humiliation. She simply slid a small folder across the table. Inside were drawings the children had made, pictures of themselves holding hands with Grace. Captions scribbled in childish handwriting. Family. Safe with Grace, don't leave us. The millionaire's hands trembled as he flipped through them. Grace said only one thing: they're telling you the truth. I don't need to. That moment landed harder than any argument ever could. The fiancée had money, charm, and status on her side, but Grace had loyalty, history, and a bond money could never buy. And slowly, people started to notice the cracks in the fiancée's perfect act. Relatives whispered about her coldness. Friends remembered her snide comments. Even the staff she barked orders at began shifting their quiet allegiance back to Grace. The balance of power was changing subtly, invisibly, but unmistakably. And the fiancée, she sensed it slipping, which only made her more dangerous. Because when someone like her realizes she can't win fairly, she starts playing dirty. And that, my friends, set the stage for a finale no one in that house saw coming. What's the worst example of someone underestimating the wrong person you've ever seen? It's funny how masks never slip all at once. They crack first, small fractures no one notices, until the whole thing shatters. And that's exactly what began to happen to the fiancée cutie. At first, it was subtle, a snapped remark at a dinner party, a withering glare when someone praised Grace in front of her. Guests smiled politely, but their eyes flicked uneasy. Money could buy dresses and diamonds, but it couldn't hide resentment oozing out in plain sight. The first real slip came during a charity gala. The fiancée, eager to show off her new family, insisted the children attend, but instead of clinging to her side like picture-perfect accessories, they bolted toward Grace, who'd been invited by one of the family's cousins. Cameras caught the moment, little arms wrapped tight around Grace, while the fiancée stood there, hand frozen knitting. The photo hit society pages the next morning under the headline, "The heart behind the family." Ironically, it wasn't about her. By then, Whispers were spreading faster than she could control. Friends who once fawned over her began keeping their distance. Even business partners of the millionaire started asking questions. One of them reportedly said, if she treats his children's caregiver like this, how will she treat us when no one's watching? And that stung up behind closed doors. The fiancée's frustration exploded. She confronted the millionaire. Late one night, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Either she goes, she hissed, or I do. It should have been a winning move, force him into a corner. But she hadn't calculated one thing: the children, because just then, the youngest padded into the room, rubbing sleepy eyes. Daddy, she whispered, don't let Miss Grace go, please. The room fell silent. The millionaire looked at his daughter, then at the woman he thought he loved, and for the first time, doubt carved deep into his expression. Grace, meanwhile, never raised her voice. She didn't campaign. She didn't defend herself in long speeches. She simply kept showing up for the children, reading bedtime stories when invited, sitting through recitals with quiet pride, being steady when the rest of the house shook with tension. And people noticed. Relatives who once tolerated the fiancé out of politeness began pulling Grace aside with soft words of encouragement. Teachers at the kids' school sent emails praising her consistency. Even the staff drivers, housekeepers, cooks shifted their loyalty back to her, no longer hiding their disdain for the fiancé's commands. One afternoon, the housekeeper muttered under her breath, "We know who the real lady of this house is." Grace only smiled faintly, never fueling the fire. But the fiancé heard, and every overheard whisper, every lingering look, chipped away at the empire she thought she was building. The backlash soon reached the millionaire's business world. A deal slipped through after an associate remarked he couldn't risk getting entangled in household scandals. Investors wanted stability, not headlines about a volatile soon-to-be wife alienating the woman raising his children. The pressure mounted, and the more the fiancé clawed to keep control, the faster it all slipped away. One night, during a family dinner, the children made their stance crystal clear. The eldest, old enough to understand the tension, stood up, voice trembling but firm. "Dad," he said, glancing at Grace before staring his father down, "if she goes, we go too." The table went silent. The fiancé's fork clattered against her plate. The millionaire's face drained of color. Because, how do you argue with your own children when they've already chosen their side? Grace said nothing. She placed her napkin down gently and excused herself from the table. She didn't need to stay and watch the fireworks. Dignity was her quiet armor, and that restraint, it was devastating, because while the fiancé screamed, while she scrambled, while she accused everyone of betrayal, Grace simply kept her head high. And in that silence, everyone saw the truth. The mask had finally shattered. The carefully curated image of the perfect socialite fiancé lay in ruins, and there was no repairing it. The millionaire was left staring at the wreckage, at the woman he thought was his future, and at the one who had been holding his present together all along. And as for Grace, she didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She simply went home that night, tucked the children into bed, and whispered the same words she'd told them since the beginning: "You're safe, I'm here." Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't fireworks or fury, it's patience. It's letting someone reveal exactly who they are while you remain unshaken. Do you think the millionaire will side with his fiancée, or with the nanny who raised his kids? The moment didn't arrive with shouting. It came quietly, folded into an envelope. One morning, Grace found a letter slipped beneath her door. The handwriting was the millionaire's, firm but restless, like a man trying to steady his hand while his world spun out of control. She read it slowly. Grace, I don't know how we got here. The house feels colder without your laughter in it. The children need you. If I've failed to protect you, I'm sorry, but I need to know, what will it take to make this right? Grace sat for a long time after, the children playing in the background, She could have rushed to him, begged to be heard, fought for her place. But that wasn't who she was. She had given years of loyalty, love, and consistency. She didn't need to fight. She needed to decide. That evening, she requested a meeting not in the grand dining room, not in the office lined with trophies, but in the children's playroom, toys scattered, drawings taped to the walls, tiny fingerprints smudging every surface. It wasn't just their world, it was hers too. When the millionaire arrived, he looked smaller somehow. His tailored suit didn't hide the exhaustion on his face. He glanced at Grace, then at the children clustered near her, as though instinctively choosing her side. Grace didn't waste words. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "I'm here to set terms." His brow furrowed. "Terms, yes." Her voice was calm, steady. "If I stay on my conditions. No more power games. No more threats. The children's well-being comes first, always. And if your fiancé can't accept that, then the choice isn't mine to make. It's yours." The millionaire's eyes flicked with conflict. He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the fiancé stormed in. "Of course she did." Her tone was sharp enough to cut stone. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating you, playing victim. If you had any backbone, you'd end this charade now." Grace didn't even look at her. Instead, she placed her hands gently on the shoulders of the two children beside her. "You see," she said softly, but the words carried like thunder, "this isn't about me. It's about them, and they already know where their home is." The silence that followed was unbearable. The fiancé's face twisted, waiting for him to back her up, but the millionaire didn't. He looked at his children, their tiny, pleading faces, their grip on Grace's hands, and then back at the woman he thought he loved. His voice was quiet, but resolute. "Grace is right. This ends tonight." And with that, the balance of power shifted. The fiancé's shriek echoed through the house, rage spilling over as she realized her control was gone. She hurled accusations, slammed doors, and threatened to leave, but the damage was already done. Her words had no weight anymore. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply gathered the children, whispering the same promise she always had. Asterisk, "You're safe. I'm here." Asterisk. And that night, for the first time in months, the house exhaled. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be moved. Time has a way of revealing who truly belongs in your story. Months passed, and the storm that once rattled the house gave way to something steadier, warmer. The children, asterisk those who once clung to Grace out of fear of losing her, now thrived in the certainty that she wasn't going anywhere. Mornings became easier. Laughter filled the kitchen again, the kind that only children can make, unfiltered and loud. Grace moved through the routines not as the nanny, but as the anchor everyone quietly recognized her to be. She still read bedtime stories, still packed school lunches with little notes tucked inside, but now those gestures carried more weight. They weren't just habits, they were reminders. Asterisk, "This is what love looks like." Asterisk, the millionaire noticed. Slowly, he began to shed the distractions that had once consumed him. Business deals no longer seemed more important than school recitals. His phone stayed in his pocket longer. He started asking questions about the kids' art projects, about their favorite books, about Grace's life outside of the house. It was as if he was relearning the value of being present. Meanwhile, the fiancé's grip crumbled. At first, she lingered in social circles, insisting she'd been misunderstood. But masks only last so long. Friends grew tired of the drama, her polished veneer cracking under the weight of her bitterness. Invitations stopped coming. Business acquaintances kept their distance. Eventually, she was no longer a fiancée, just a name mentioned in hushed tones, followed by a knowing shake of the head. Grace never gloated. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in watching someone else fall, asterisk, it was in watching the children rise. One afternoon, the eldest handed her a drawing. 3 figures, him, his sibling, and Grace, all holding hands beneath a sun with crooked rays. In bold, messy letters, he'd written, Asterisk our real family. Asterisk Grace held back tears. But her smile said everything. The millionaire saw it too, and, though he never said it outright, his actions spoke volumes. He began involving Grace in decisions beyond childcare, family trips, educational choices, even long-term plans for the household. He knew she had earned a place no one could replace, and perhaps the most telling change of all, the way the children carried themselves. No more fear of being overlooked. No more anxiety when tempers rose in the house. They had confidence now because they knew they had Grace in their corner. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't pretend to be. There were still tough days, still tantrums and tears. But healing isn't about pretending the cracks never happened. It's about filling them with something stronger. And that was Grace's legacy. Not wealth, not status, not power gains. Just quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need recognition to matter. In the end, the fiancé faded into irrelevance. The millionaire learned where true loyalty lay. And the children, they grew up with a living example of what it meant to stand your ground with love, not anger. Because the truth is, respect isn't bought with money, it's earned through love, loyalty, and the courage to stand your ground. In the end, Grace didn't need a grand stage to prove her worth. She didn't need headlines, applause, or victory speeches. Her triumph was quieter than that, woven into bedtime stories, steady arms when the kids cried, and the peace that finally settled over a home once torn apart by ego. The fiancé may have strutted in with diamonds and control on her mind, but she walked out with nothing. No loyalty, no respect, no lasting place in their lives. Because power built on fear always crumbles. Grace, she remained, not as an employee, not as someone easily dismissed, but as the heart of the family, the one who never bowed, never wavered, and never let love be pushed aside. That's real strength. Not cruelty, not manipulation, just resilience, rooted in dignity. And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Money buys attention, but character earns loyalty. Grace never played the fiancé's game. And still, she won, not through revenge, in the loud, fiery sense, but through love that endured every storm. So, when we talk about victory, sometimes it's not about who shouts the loudest. Sometimes it's about who stays standing when the shouting's done. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. These scripts take hours to craft, and your support helps keep stories like this alive. Because in the end, dignity always outlasts cruelty, always.